I've got here with me Tim Harford, senior columnist at the Financial Times in the UK. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you here with us at the PSG conference. And just to pick your brain a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So we'll get right into it. How can behavioral economics help advisors to better help their clients?
So behavioral economics is the kind of strange merger of psychology and economics, trying to build psychological insight, psychological realism into economic ideas.
Okay.
So, I mean, a classic insight from economics is the efficient markets hypothesis. Basically, you shouldn't try to pick winners. You just invest in the market. But behavioral economics adds this idea of, well, what are people thinking when they make trades, and are there any systematic mistakes that they make? Because if they're making systematic mistakes, that's room for improvement. So just a couple of examples. One mistake that we make is sometimes called the disposition effect, and that is I'm not willing to sell losers. I want to sell only winning stocks. I will sell my stocks in Apple, but I'm not willing to sell my stocks in Lehman Brothers. I'm waiting for the Lehman Brothers stocks to come back. And of course, actually, in many jurisdictions, for tax reasons, you want exactly the opposite behaviour. You want to sell the losers because it gives you a tax break, and you want to hold on to the winners. So just understanding that that's a problem leads to better decisions. And a second example is people tend to systematically overtrade. There's a bias towards action. We trade too much. Of course, every time you trade, there's a cost. And so behavioral economists who've studied this find that the less that people tend to trade, the more they just sort of buy and stick with their beliefs, the higher the returns generally going to be.
All right. Well, people think forecasting is a numbers game. But in your talk, you said it's more than that. Could you take us through that?
Yeah. So I've been fascinated by how we make forecasts, because many forecasts are not very good. We know this. And so there's a psychologist called Philip Tetlock who has been studying forecasts really since the mid-1980s. And he's been doing something very interesting. So he's been using the numbers, very, very rigorous statistical methods, to judge our psychology and the way that we make decisions. And what he's found in a nutshell, I mean, it's a very big piece of work. First of all, we're not very good. The average forecaster, even an expert, is no better. Thinks he's good or she's good. Although actually the overconfidence is slightly more men. But women are also not very good. We're all bad. Just women are slightly less bad than men, as it happens.
All right, that's fine.
But what he finds is that most forecasters don't do any better than random chance. So I mean, the simple way to do that is to say the chimp throwing darts is as good as the rest of us. And this is not just about stock market forecasts. This is economic, geopolitical, any big picture stuff. But what Tetlock found is people who are very systematically open-minded, they're constantly looking to find a reason to change their beliefs. They're constantly looking to challenge themselves. They love getting into arguments, not so they can prove they're clever, but so that they can get an opportunity to change their minds.
Of course.
Those people do much better. And when you think about open-mindedness, we all like to think we're open-minded.
Of course, until we're challenged with something that we've believed so hard in,
Absolutely. So there was a panel discussion here at the PSG conference where it was a really good, polite, robust discussion. Really, really helpful. But one thing that nobody did was to say, you know what, I didn't think of that, and I'm changing my mind. It's very unusual behaviour, but Tetlock found that that's what you find in the best forecasters.
And you also mentioned super forecasting. Are those a little bit more higher up than the average forecaster? But more accurate, rather.
So Tetlock identified this group of people called super forecasters, and they tend to be actively open-minded. They tend to keep score. They tend to be better when they're in a team with other super forecasters. You've got a whole bunch of people who are criticising each other, criticising themselves, and getting to a better result. But one of the things that the super forecasters have is what Tetlock calls calibration. So the idea is not just that I predict things that are going to happen, and I predict that things that aren't going to happen, I predict they're not going to happen. That's what you want. But what you also want is a sense of your own limitations. So it's much easier to make forecasts, for instance, about the territorial integrity of Canada than to make a forecast about the territorial integrity of Syria. And yet, for most forecasters, they seem to act like these are equally difficult problems or equally simple problems, whereas the super forecaster has a real sense of this is a hard problem, this is an easy problem, and I know the difference.
And what actually makes a good forecaster, in your opinion, at least?
Well, I mean, my opinion doesn't much matter. Tetlock is one of my favourite social scientists, so I'm really serious about what he does. Just to reiterate, in a team with other good forecasters helps. Active open-mindedness, constantly asking yourself if you're wrong, keeping score, so going back, because we systematically misremember our previous forecasts, so we remember them being good when they weren't. So keep score, go back and check, there's always room for improvement. And a final thing is a sort of statistical approach to the world, something that the psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls the base rate. So there's just, economies go into recession roughly every 10 years. There's a certain frequency with which dictators are toppled. There's a certain frequency with which wars happen. And so when you're looking at making any forecast at all, rather than just forming an immediate impression, which is like,
because of the pattern.
This guy won't last. Instead, what you should be doing as a starting point is, what's the base rate? How often do economies go into recession? How often are dictators toppled in coups? Once I understand that should be my starting point, and then I can go on to make more sophisticated forecasts.
Of course.
So bear in mind the base rate.
The base rate, all right. Do you think behavioral economists themselves are immune to mistakes they identify?
Well, I should give the word on this to Daniel Kahneman. So he won a Nobel Prize in economics. He's a psychologist and one of the founders of behavioral economics. And he wrote this very successful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, about all of these mistakes that we tend to make and the way we think. And he said, you may think if you read this book, then you'll stop making these mistakes. Well, I can assure you, I wrote the book and I haven't stopped making the mistakes. So you like to think that you live and learn, and by being aware of certain cognitive biases, certain tendencies we have, it's going to make you a little bit wiser. But we have to recognise a lot of these instincts, they're buried quite deep, quite primal. And just because you become aware of them, it doesn't immediately make you proof against those mistakes. So we're all vulnerable to cognitive
exactly.
biases.
And I think a lot of things are so unpredictable. So your way of thinking always changes and evolves.
Well, I would hope. I would hope it changes and evolves. But actually, one of the points that I was making, in my remarks here at the conference, was that we actually don't change our minds as much as we should. And that leads to two problems. First of all, we make bad forecasts. Because we're not open-minded enough, we're not questioning ourselves enough. But second, and this is really unforgivable, because everyone gets forecasts wrong, but like even after your forecast has gone wrong, you're still in denial. You're still not changing your mind. And that seems, well, who would behave like that?
There's a certain arrogance attached to that as well.
Well, yes, but I think it's human nature. And the more you've committed your own reputation, your money, your client's money, the harder it is to back out of that situation. So that's a problem that we all have. John Maynard Keynes had this famous statement. He actually probably never said it, but it's a famous quote. When the facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do? And I think it's memorable because Keynes did live like that. He really was willing to change his mind, but most of us aren't.
Are not. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I thank you so much for your sentiments and your insight today on this particular topic. And we hope to catch up with you throughout the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.